Good evening. Yes. Thank you. Welcome to everyone here at the National Opera Center and to our viewers joining us via live stream. My name is Jamelah Rimawi, and I'm the Chief Programs Officer here at OPERA America. Tonight, we conclude our 24-25 season, which included everything from conversations with Anthony Roth-Costanzo and Janine Tesori to a showcase on new works. You can revisit the entire onstage season on our website, operaamerica.org. There, you can also explore content like our oral history project, which features interviews with industry veterans. The conversations you'll find on our website offer insights for those who want to learn more about opera, as well as for rising professionals who want to hear more from the experts who came before them. We're thrilled to have a truly visionary guest to close out this extraordinary season, someone who's redefining the landscape of opera and theater with her bold, imaginative storytelling and innovative direction. Elkhanah Pulitzer is an acclaimed opera and theater director known for her fearless approach to contemporary and classical works alike. With a rich background in both music and dramatic arts, she has brought a fresh, deeply human perspective to stages across the country. From major opera houses to experimental theater spaces, her work has been seen in institutions like San Francisco Opera, Carnegie Hall, and in just a few weeks, a debut at the Metropolitan Opera. What sets Elkhanah apart is not just her command of the stage, but her ability to create emotionally immersive experiences that resonate far beyond the final curtain. Whether she's reinterpreting classics like The Flying Dutchman or staging new and bold productions, she invites audiences to engage with art in a meaningful way. In tonight's conversation, we'll explore her creative process, what inspires her, and how she navigates the challenges of modern storytelling in opera. So whether you're a longtime fan of the art or just curious about what it takes to bring a production to life, you're in for a treat. Please welcome Elkhanah, and thank you all so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you all. So first up, I know it's everybody's favorite question in the conversations. We're going to start with, what is your favorite opera? Who took you, when, and did you like it at first?
Yeah, it's interesting because you sent some of the questions ahead, and of course that's the one that's always at the end of the magazines that I've read for years growing up. And it is sort of like the desert island question, right? Especially in the world of opera. I was thinking about it, and I feel like where I want to start in terms of describing what was meaningful is actually what had all the aspects of opera, but was really kind of tiny and in like a school auditorium when I was really little. And it included live music and singing and movement and acting and text, and it was just a small little troupe. And it just was so exciting and got me so jazzed about what's possible with the form that it sort of has all the elements because, ultimately opera is the Gesamtkunstwerk of all performative art forms coalescing as well as visual arts and other, when it's great, it's better than the rest in terms of coalescing everything. And so, but the seeds of it are pretty simple if you think about it and accessible and can be done in a school cafeteria. So anyhow, that was sort of is where I wanted to start.
Thank you. So very multidisciplinary and awesome. Next up, when did becoming a stage director first interest you, and how did you get started in an area where you can't audition?
Yeah, it's definitely. I remember. So when I was a little kid, I used to play in my room. I have a sister and I have some cousins, and we certainly did some shows. And I had a bunk bed, and family came and sat, on the 2 rows, so to speak, and saw the show. And there's still a copy of some of the old programs, that kind of thing. But But I spent a lot of time sort of daydreaming, I would say, as a kid in my room, playing with creating worlds, but not necessarily wanting to act them out. So I wanted to sort of set up environments, sometimes with Barbie, and then didn't really want to inhabit one individual perspective inside of it. I wanted to sort of stay outside of it, crafting the sort of entire world of the piece. And I didn't know what that would turn into or what that was called or what that would be, but essentially that's, I think that's fundamentally what directors do. Yes, they help create worlds. So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, I don't know about you all, but growing up with cousins, siblings, putting on plays and reimagining Barbies, Legos, all of it, that's something that a lot of us do, so, yeah. So your bio reads that you're a stage director who explores the intersection of music and theater through innovation and hybridized forms. What does this mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting, I guess in terms of my origin story, I came through a project-based learning school when I was a kid. We did all kinds of cool arts and things. I was at a public high school that had a nonprofit student-run theater company that Joseph Chaikin came and wrote an AIDS play with us, so it was pretty maverick in terms of the level of discourse, and we were doing a lot of Brecht, and I was wanting a sort of foundation in some of the more classical repertoire, and so then I started sort of exploring that as I got older and into grad school and undergrad, etc. But in terms of all that, I think it comes down to curiosity and just having a love of art and learning, and I have a family that's very sort of deeply steeped in curation and art collection and art appreciation, and so there's a lot of sort of templates coming through school and through family in terms of values around finding access to art and exposure in a way that allowed me to, feel like I had a way in. And so the hybridized forms is really about wanting to bring together different interests and passions. And then also I kind of fell into working with symphonies, doing pieces that are sort of non-traditional, non-concert driven works in those spaces. And what's interesting about that is that it awakens the audience because they're walking into a hall that's been transformed and is sort of outside the norm of what their patron journey is. And the institutions are not necessarily familiar with what it means to produce like an opera on the stage. And so, so there are ways that you can experiment and essentially kind of break some of the rules and create sort of new encounters that also speaks to the, I think, hybridized forms. Plus I have also done some installations, and I still do like site-specific work and have set operas like Lulu in an old Beaux-Arts train station that was dilapidated and things like that. So it's sort of, there's a range.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So your work has definitely spanned a range from inherited repertoire to new pieces. What is the difference like in your approach to this storytelling? And is it more rewarding to create a first production to a piece that's never been performed?
Definitely several questions in there. I mean, I think I've kind of been pegged as like an old and new, person in terms of like doing the Baroque stuff, which I find thrilling because it has roots in jazz and improvisation and a walking bass line and all that stuff. And then the new work I find liberating because I'm not interested in sort of the museum aspect of some of the ossified expectations that are sort of attached to certain canonical works from kind of the middle era that get done a lot. And so, so that hasn't really been a calling, but new work is really exciting to me, to be there on the ground up and to help with the dramaturgy of the spine of the story and to deconstruct and break down an event in terms of if it's embedded in the music or the text or both and how and when and all those kinds of explorations are profoundly rewarding to be working with living composers, you know. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, usually Mark Skorga, our CEO and president, is the one that does these interviews, but I know you had lunch with him the other day, and so I'd like to follow up on something that you mentioned. That new pieces require enough developmental time to succeed. So with each piece needing that investment of time, can you talk about a little bit what a good developmental process looks like for a new work?
Sure. I mean, I think for people who have done it before, they know what they need, right? And each team and each story needs something unique to that time and that place, because we're always working for what's happening right now in the world in some way. And so, you know, different composers have different temperaments and different methods. Some start with a piano vocal score, some write in full orchestra mode right out of the gate. But I would say in terms of cultivation and support of people who are entering the opera field, it really is helpful to have a libretto workshop and work with actors and have that text read, and then also certainly hear you know, piano vocal workshop, and I would argue for some kind of orchestral glimpse, because I think oftentimes even the most sort of lofty and established people still find discoveries and wonderful things. It's just a matter of making sure that that incubation and cultivation process is also being sensitive to how they get feedback, and it feels, you know, safe and appropriate in terms of their own creative process. Yeah.
Thank you. Staying on the topic of new work for a second, you've directed a lot of pieces that have had second and subsequent productions. What kind of impact does that have on the development of the piece?
Well, I mean, if it's a good show, it's a lot of fun. I mean, you hope they're all good, but they're not all good, no matter what you do, right? Yeah, in fact, we have kids, and I was, you know, explaining, it's like, well, we can't promise that this show that we're going to go see is going to be any good, but we go with faith and hope, and, you know, the few times where it really gets, like, to that elevated level of magic that everyone's seeking, makes all the other times we try worth it, right? It's the ineffable sort of quest for the thing that's greater than all of its parts and all of its peoples, right? That elevates us and the form and ultimately celebrates the capacities of humans to do, you know, transportive things. So, yeah, kind of lost. So what was the second part of the question?
Just, you know, what kind of impact does that have on the development of something that, so for instance, next up I'm asking you about what adjustments have you made on something like Antony and Cleopatra?
Sure, yeah, so we did that piece in San Francisco for the premiere during the centennial, and it's based on Shakespeare's play, and so it was cut. And Lucia Schechner, a dramaturg who I met when I was at Columbia in grad school, and John Adams and I all sat down and really tried to sort of work the spine of that piece, which is very broad, and like 40 plus scenes, 40 plus characters, to really distill it down. And so being able to revisit it, because it is a complicated, challenging piece musically, it's very rich, the text is very dense, and so having a chance to do it in San Francisco, and then we did it in Liceo, I think about a year ago in Barcelona, and now we're doing it again, and we're bringing with us all these incredible artists who have been on the journey with us, and some of whom John wrote the piece expressly for, Julia Bullock, Jerry Finley, and Paul Appleby. And so now we're just getting to go deeper and find more discoveries, and it's more liberating because we're not just sort of trying to get our footing and kind of get a first pass at putting it on its feet, you know?
So you mentioned the artists who have been along for the ride. What's your the best way to integrate new artists into the process?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to values, and I guess I feel like, you know, being generous of spirit, creating a room that feels safe and inclusive, and allows for differences of perspective, and has open channels of communication, like such basic things that suddenly seem radical given what's going on outside in the world. That's really sort of what we go back to as a baseline. So when people are coming into the room, I was talking about this at the first presentation of the show and tell that you do whenever you are like getting everyone oriented on what the world of the piece is. The first day of rehearsal, you sort of walk through all the designs and explain everything. And I was saying that there's the small self that's like you brush your teeth and you show up at rehearsal on time and you like get to the building and you walk past these, Maria Callas paintings in the halls of the Met to get to rehearsal. And so I was saying you encounter friends because it's repping 7 shows, and so other people are in other shows that you run into in the hall, but you're also walking by the ghosts of these sort of incredible artists that you're hopefully standing on the shoulders of. And so in a way, there's also the big self, right, which is the part where we're all tied to something eternal and greater than what we're doing just in any given sort of moment. And so asking people to take care of the net that is sort of that web that allows us all to feel connected and to feel cared for, even when we're running through our different tracks, because it gets pretty bananas, as you can imagine, when everyone's sort of like doing their dressing room and going to their fight call, and like no one's actually saying hi because everyone's just like busy. And so I guess that's how I would say is the values of taking care of the small self and the big self in the community of making a piece is becoming more and more important to me, especially with the lack of care and belligerent brutality of what's happening outside the door.
Thank you for that. That's really important. So we usually think of the inherited repertoire as Mozart to Puccini, but you've directed Baroque opera as well. Is there a link between the new operas that you do and the Baroque opera from the perspective of being a stage director?
Well, I mean, in terms of the Baroque, there are some things that are open. I mean, instrumentation, color, what the conductor wants to do, what the ornamentation is going to be. All that stuff's really way more open in Baroque, which is fun. And also stuff's like incomplete, so you can kind of cut and paste and map it and make your own piece, and so it's very freeing. And I guess that's some of the same sort of freedom that also comes with new work, because when you're doing the new work, you're already sort of sans the straitjacket of like, I think I was telling Mark the other day, like the fermata that someone has to grab the candlestick on in Tosca leaves very little room for a director. I mean, unless you want to sort of toss out the whole container and start fresh. But the trappings and expectations that come with that for some audience is like long-held attitudes. And so just bypassing that lane and going straight for new and old is sort of where I found liberation and also more freedom of voice, just in terms of like, I can do what I want because I'm not entrenched in some old models.
Thank you. So can you tell us about the Fragments project, and how does that represent a fusion of the old and new to you?
Sure. So Fragments is a project that Elisa Weilerstein conceived of, and she's a famous cellist. And so it's the Bach cello suites, which she's famous for playing, along with 22 commissions of living composers who deliberately were selected in terms of a wide range of age and geography and narrative in terms of the history of these composers to do short pieces. And so in Spoleto this summer, we're premiering the marathon of all 6 nights of one cello suite per night, interwoven with 5 to 6 new composers' voices. They're all each kind of a textile night. They all have a different emotional core and a lighting and scenic aspects, and it's been really fun because part of the parameter for that was, in developing it, was that people don't know what they're hearing before they actually get to listen to it. They know who the composers are and they know which cello suite it is. And there's no primacy of Bach in the conception of each evening. But there's also no reading the bio of the living composer and making assumptions in one's mind based on what that bio says about what their influences might be or what their musical world is or anything. And so it's a little bit more like a Rorschach, where you get to actually just experience it on a more intuitive, emotional level, and then go back and find out more about the composers. But it's sort of without the trappings of some of the baggage that we carry innately in terms of finding out someone's name and where they studied, and then thereby sort of imprinting on them certain expectations.
I mean, I don't know about you all, but I do like exploring the unknown. So,
Yes.
Fragments
Yes.
this summer at Spoleto, right?
That's correct.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, you've worked with symphonies and created theatrical performances in concert halls. Are these projects filled with more restrictions or opportunities to do different things?
Ultimately, I feel like it's opportunities because, the orchestras often are just like the best of the best in terms of chops. I mean, L.A. Phil and Gustavo Dudamel and, there's just like people just to work with who are just so on top of their game and such profound artists that it's just really thrilling. And I feel like, again, being outside of the sort of standard proscenium box of a classic opera house has liberation aspects, and sometimes it even means in terms of like where the epicenter of the event is located can be reassigned in the room. It doesn't have to always be the same orientation or the same frame, and that's really freeing in terms of storytelling.
Thank you. So you're also a librettist. Some say that Mozart had great libretti, and some great operas have bad libretti. What makes a good libretto for you, and how has your experience as a stage director shaped your approach to writing new libretto?
I would say I'm pretty, in terms of librettist, I would tout myself more as a dramaturg and director at this point than as a librettist. I did do some of that work, and I was younger when I did it, and had help and used, actually the quest of the hero's, 17 phases of the hero's journey from, not Joseph Chaikin. Joseph Campbell, thank you, The Power of Myth. But in terms of more recently, what makes a good libretto, I do feel like for a long time I saw these, I'd get the libretto, it was 9 pages, and it looked like a haiku was on sort of, each page, and it was is this the whole thing? This is it? And so, I think there's a balance in terms of each project has different themes and ideas, but there was sort of a trend towards very little in the text for many years. And then now things have gotten more, I think, interesting and dynamic. I do think that, poetry and music essentially calm the mind enough to allow you to access the soul and the spirit, right? That's sort of what the conduit for it is. And so if the language of the libretto is all mundane, street speak, it can have some potency, but I do feel like metaphor or some sort of poetic aspect to the text creates a deeper, richer sort of thing to dig into for the music to talk with.
And are there any helpful hints or exercises you would let people know about that would kind of open that up for them?
I guess the biggest thing is just chasing one's curiosity and one's interests in terms of it might seem like it's not going to intersect with what the project might be, but I remember, I don't know if people do this anymore, but when I was in school, we used to go into the stacks and study, and I know people do it differently now. I'm like all dated and, whatever, but one of the beauties of being in the stacks was you're in there studying a particular sort of subject or topic, but you wander around or you see what's in the Dewey Decimal, like in association with the thing you're doing. And inevitably some other cool stuff intersects with that, and that's a gift. And, I was doing, I remember a project with my husband. We were doing Vasilisa and the Saga of Baba Yaga, which is a puppet show version of the old folktale. And we decided to bring a friend in who wrote for a jazz trio to create the music for the piece. And the idea of the intersection of sort of old Russian folktale and live jazz music, is again one of those things you don't necessarily conceptually think immediately is the right path forward, but ended up being very enlivening because of the intersection. And I'd say in general that seems to be a good thing to invite or invoke, is to be humbled by the unknown and to hopefully invite it in a way that's positive,
Absolutely. So you've worked in large companies and small experimental companies. Do you have a preference, and why?
Well, it's funny because aspirationally the model used to be that sort of bigger is better in the opera sphere. You sort of start out at scrappy little companies and you try to earn your keep and get your way up, and you get more budget and more resources, and then you can do bigger projects and have, hopefully reach larger audiences because the houses are bigger. I think that model is definitely, it's in the throes of transformation right now, particularly given a lot of things that have happened in the last few years. But I like both. I think that stories need different containers, different worlds, different sizes, and the proximity of audience to the event matters greatly. And so sometimes that scale should be this room, and sometimes it needs to be, a Greek amphitheater at sunset with 1,200 people, It just depends.
So with the large companies and symphonies that you've worked with, is the Metropolitan Opera any different, and how?
Well, I guess it's definitely, I would say, probably the biggest place I've ever worked. And we are working on a piece right now that has a dance component. We've had access to the ballet studio, and now this week no longer, because there are 7 shows in the house in rehearsal. So just the sheer magnitude of scale inside of the building is just different than I've ever encountered. But then you sort of peel the onion back, and it's like, well, at the end of the day, we're just rehearsing in a basement, just like everybody else. And yeah, there's a lot more depth on the bench, but it comes down to who's in the room and what the ideas are. And the same parallel, which I've talked about, is is it a plastic pitcher or is it a cut glass carafe in a penthouse for a board meeting, or in a garage? It doesn't matter. What matters is the people in the room.
Well said. Thank you. So with your range of experience, how would you like to see opera evolve in the years ahead?
Well, I was thinking about it. I didn't go after opera. It sort of found me, and I guess I just, in terms of, because I got the question ahead, and I was like, well, what do I wish for? And I wish it was more popular. I wish it was a little bit more understood and accessible. And I know everyone keeps scratching their heads about, threshold to enter and sort of the love-hate relationship between well, it's amazing and people dress up and it's expensive and it's a grand night out, but then also how do you get them to come back? Because if it's such a huge outlay of cash, then it's not a regular habit. And that's sort of the, again, slightly older model that people have been trying to sort of wrestle with and break open. But yeah, I which is sort of full circle back to what I said about the show in the cafeteria or in the amphitheater. Amphitheater of the little theater in my school is it starts with being a kid and seeing work and feeling like I could be a part of it, or that I could be welcome to enjoy it and be invited into it in some way, and that feels essential. Like, it feels like that it only comes with that kind of exposure, because otherwise, if you don't know what it is, how could you necessarily want to try it regularly,
Sure do. And what advice do you have for younger directors and or librettists that are seeking to establish careers in opera?
Well, I guess it's, the sort of, there used to be the hierarchy of education, right? And before that, it was sort of apprenticeship. And I was sort of on the cusp, where grad schools were sort of starting to come online with like real legitimate directing programs. And so there was some map, right? For certain methods of getting experience and exposure. And now things are definitely decentralized and de-hierarchized, and so in a way it's a little bit like you can, make your own fame, you can start your own startup, right? Like all this messaging around autonomy and sort of breaking with traditional pathways. And so I think there's some truth in that in terms of young directors don't necessarily have to play the game in sort of traditional ways. And the other thing that my parents didn't ever tell me, but others I've seen, their parents suggested to them, intern in something that you're interested in and see if it's if it has any sort of legs for you. Because then, at least by proximity and hopefully by some osmosis, you are like in with people who you might aspirationally want to then eventually work with or study with or be mentored by. And being young and like having to build that resume, you might as well be doing that anyway, right? So I guess I would just say, try to find places to be with people that you aspire to collaborate with.
Wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you have going on for the next few months before we say good evening?
Sure. Well, so obviously I'm in rehearsal for ANTONY CLEOPATRA that opens May 12th, and it's based on the Shakespeare, and it's fantastic, and it's John Adams, and he's amazing, and cast is great. Then I go to Spoleto and do the Fragments project, which we've been working on for over 3 years, because we were kind of doing, 1 or 2 fragments at a time, as composers were also submitting the material, and Elisa was conceiving of how it's going to weave together. I'm also doing a Wozzeck at West Edge Opera. I've worked with them for years and love them, and they let me do more radical kind of out there stuff that's riskier and a little bit more kind of fringy in terms of its aesthetic, which is certainly kind of my origin story. So it's always liberating to go back, and for Wozzeck I'm going to have buckets of blood on stage and a drain in the center and lots of bodily fluids, and that's going to be really fun because it's such a horrific story, and Berg is so brilliant, and it's only 90 minutes long, so that's awesome. I'm very excited about that. And then I'm doing a Hildegard project with Beth Morrison Projects. Sarah Kirkland Snyder is the composer. She wrote Penelope. Beth heard that and loved it and has now essentially commissioned her to do her first opera, and that's been in the works for quite a while. And really excited. It's about Hildegard von Bingen, and it's a full 2-act piece, and that's going to play at LA Opera in November and then come to Prototype in January.
Sounds like an amazing few months ahead for you.
Yeah,
Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, absolutely.
In adapting, I assume you sat in the process of adapting Antony and Cleopatra. As you comment, it's a sprawling, highly political story with a lot of different strands. But at the core, it's also a love story. how did the two of you, or did in the adaptation, was there a methodology that was developed in terms of how to focus the content, or to some degree, shall we say, streamline it without so making it kind of a paint by numbers or the animated comics type version of it?
Sure.
And did you find that the sexual dynamics of the story needed to be refreshed in any way?
That second question is really interesting. The first one, so we put in terms of cutting the play, we really just, Shakespeare's famous for toggling, right, in terms of all kinds of complicated themes. And anyway, so we knew we wanted to toggle between the public and private and sort of do a lifestyles of the rich and famous aspect in a 1930s lens for sort of the Hollywood glamour starlet of Cleopatra, because that's like, you think of Liz Taylor, you think of Claudette Colbert immediately in terms of the audience, you hear that word and you haven't even seen the show or the poster, but you already have conceptual sort of springboards for it. And so so we knew we wanted to play with the sort of, the public persona versus the messy private lives of these people. And ultimately, the levers of the play are that every private action has a parallel public political, parallel. And so each time something bad happens in the play, it's happening on a personal level as well as a huge sort of world stage level. And it's because they're so enmeshed in their relationships with one another in their private lives, not just Antony and Cleopatra, but Octavian, who's going to become Augustus, rebrand himself and become the first Roman emperor and essentially kill the Republic. And so that was also kind of interesting given where we are outside right now. So we just wanted to create the primacy of really the love and the fall of Antony and Cleopatra in tandem with the rise of Caesar. Because that's at its essence what the story fundamentally is. And you're right, it's a late play, it's political, it's romantic, and it's historical, and it's complicated, And so there's a lot going on there. In terms of what you're asking about the sort of rebrand or dealing with, some of the sexuality aspects, Cleopatra gets described in the play by a Roman lens as a gypsy and a whore and things of that nature. But in her own language, she actually never speaks of herself. Really, she's only caring about other people. But in the history of who she was, she was a polyglot, amazing at rhetoric, learned the language of her people in the last line of 300 years of rule by the Ptolemaic family, and she was the first to do it and practiced the local customs of the people, as well as brought in a sort of Hellenistic, Greco-Roman, sensibility. And so, lots of JSTOR articles later. It just is really interesting to think about what the values of these people are, and that Antony and Cleopatra fundamentally represent a co-creation of a new world reality that embraces and accepts diversity and different cultures and ideas, and can love them and build bridges there. And Augustus represents the stamping out and eradication of difference and other cultures.
Thank you. Anybody else?
When you are directing a piece that has source material that's available, whether it's reading the novel behind Level M or La Traviata or Antony and Cleopatra or a lot of the Shakespeare pieces, do you only depict on stage what is in the libretto, or do you include information that's in the source material, like you mentioned 40 scenes for Antony and Cleopatra, but that material, some of it is not in the libretto, but it's available in the play, and so how do you decide what gets included for the audience and what you're assuming the audience might already know and it's okay to play upon, and what do you leave out because it's not in the libretto?
Well, I mean, I think again that's driven by structure, because if you have time, if the composer has given you an interlude or some kind of substantial framework in which you could actually do something, then you can do it. Or you can also, we have in Antony and Cleopatra, for example, we have a sort of panto moment that starts with film and then goes into kind of a tableau vivant. And that's a visual representation of what a character is describing while he's in a different location. And so it really just depends on what the piece, how much flex is there in there, and what does your curiosity, sort of draw you to in terms of like what you wish could be illuminated from the source material that might help ignite the audience's passion for the piece.
Anyone else? Absolutely.
Do you find you primarily pitch projects to companies, or do they approach you with invitations for projects that they'd like to see you do?
That's a great question. I mean, I laugh about that because it's been like when I was younger, just the catch-22 back to how do you get hired when you've never done it, and how do you get it on your resume if you don't have a crack at having a chance to prove yourself. So there was a lot of like, give me anything, give me lemons and I'll make lemonade, I swear I'll make lemonade for you. And now it's kind of a combination. But again, I would say it's leaning a little bit more towards new works. And so then it's sort of about like, what stories do I want to spend time cultivating with a particular group of people? And those timelines are like sometimes 3 or 5 years. So, and then who knows where that's going to go? Like, because sometimes it's about loving the people but not having a place for it.
Yeah.
This question could go on for a very long time, so please feel free to just take a slice of whatever you want to talk about, which is the collaboration with directors and designers. And when do you enjoy bringing them into the process? You can talk about older works, old, new, as you like, just because it seems to me those would be different processes as you've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest distinction is like, if it exists, you just send them like the Apple Music link to the CD. It's like, well, let's start talking about this after you get a chance to listen to it. Whereas the other, conceptually, it's like, well, this is a story about Hildegard, but there's only a few midis and but here's a libretto and it's draft 7 of 12 and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But in terms of your question about designers, I love designers. I'm married to one, and I just feel like they're just some of the coolest people that I know in terms of what they do. And again, this sort of deep knowledge and curiosity and coalescing of different aesthetic interests that the designers bring. And so I have been for several years experimenting with putting together design teams that feel like they're specifically resonant with the actual project or the material based on their sort of aesthetic range and how they might play well together. And then there are directors who work with the same team every time, and then when they're working on 3 or 4 shows, they're just like, let's talk about this one, and then we're going to hit on this one in the end of the Zoom or whatever. And so there's a logistics thing and a trust that comes out of having just we're going to do this one and then we're going to do the next one too. I definitely repeat with designers, but I just in terms of the timelines, I definitely relish the conversations and I feel like I look for designers who are really dramaturgs in terms of their true capacity. They're always looking bigger picture at story and illuminating, the more important aspects, not just, well, what about my little piece of this puzzle, so anyhow, love it. Try to get them in kind of on the early side and try to have monthly Zoom meetings, and then that kind of ramps up. And in a way, there was several years there where it was like they're my closest friends, like going into the process and into tech and the people that I want to spend the most time with. But that's changing, you know, as things do, because I also love performers. So anyway, yeah.
Really great questions. Thank you all. I think I have one more.
Sure.
Didn't give it to you earlier, but is there anything on your like top 3 list of things that you'd like to direct that you can tell us?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's certain people that, yeah, I would just work with again if they asked me. Of course, I would just say yes. I really, I love Baird's work. I'm getting to do another one, so I'm excited about that. I'm a big Janacek fan. And so I think his stuff's amazing. And he's also a great model of like, we used to use him as an example in my house because it's like Kenneth Branagh who like got an Oscar and hit it big when he was like 21. He's like a superstar. It's like, how did he do that? And then you've got Janacek who like in his 70s and 80s finally came to fruition in terms of his voice after years of studying folk music and writing his own stuff. And so like he's a hero of mine in terms of like a slow burn, long journey, you know, sort of bigger picture template for success. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be interested in doing kind of a big canonical opera again at some point, just to tango with it and to try to break it open in a new way. And yeah, those are the ones that come to mind.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Elkhanah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to our audience here live at the National Opera Center. Thank you to those joining us via live stream. And that's the end of our Onstage for the 24-25 season. Have a great night.